Okay, well, so that brings us to the novel Miracles. So it's not
Right.
directly a story about Saint Maximilian. It's about well, the narrator who pretty much is Sono Ayako, uh,
Yeah.
talking about her quest to determine the veracity of the two miracles that the Vatican had approved leading up to Kolbe's beatification. And so she's traveling around. She's going to Poland. She's going to sites of his childhood, to Auschwitz, to people who knew him, and also to Japan to learn about his time in Japan. Or well, she's from Japan, but she interviews people in Japan, and
She's
then to Italy to talk to the people who had received healing, and the doctors and such. So the kind of the two things that she's trying to figure out are the kind of the reality of miracles and the meaning of the act of
Mhm.
Saint Maximilian. There's this line, which I'll quote. Before he died, this priest flung a tough question like a red hot iron rod at the dried up soul of modern man. The question was, what does it mean for us to love one another? And then I'd like to also quote another passage where she describes something that she says when she gives lectures on Kolbe. To those of you who do not believe in God, I would like to present the death of this priest as a kind of aesthetics. Sometimes you even have to let them kill you if you want to save others. That was, for this man, a kind of pure aesthetics. And under these circumstances, he had to sacrifice his life for his aesthetics. It is only we humans who accept this kind of irrationality. Sometimes I sit back and reflect that when we embrace this kind of dangerous aesthetics, it will only cause us harm, and at times it might even actually cost us our life. Father Kolbe was not one of those 10 men originally chosen to die, so he could have rejoiced at his good fortune and left it at that. He would have been better off keeping his mouth shut and not stepping forward and dying for some stranger. But Father Kolbe's aesthetics wouldn't permit that, and it just might be that without such an intense, dangerous aesthetics, we would not be able to truly live in this world. Um, so is that Sono Ayako reaching out to the finely tuned aesthetics of the Japanese people who who have developed every possible incredibly specific art form one could imagine, such that they could perhaps appreciate that there's a certain kind of aesthetics that expresses itself in lived action and in putting everything at stake.
That's that's well said. I think there's a lot to that. It reminds me of a kind of, well, a cultural stereotype. I don't like to rely on them, but it's a very common cultural stereotype in my field of Asian studies. And it is that Chinese are philosophers. If you really want to understand the essence of Chinese culture, you have to read philosophy. But Japanese are aesthetics. If you really
Mhm.
want to understand Japanese culture, you have to understand beauty. There's, like many stereotypes, elements of truth to it. But I think Sono's also doing, as she often does, simultaneously two things at once here. She's talking about Japanese culture as aesthetics, but she's also talking to the rest of us and asking us, do you want to live a life that is mundane and routine? What does aesthetics mean to you? Isn't that where beauty comes into your life? And if you understand beauty, don't you understand that the true and the good come with beauty? If you divorce beauty, you're not going to find the true, and you're not going to find the good. Now, this is an argument that carries a lot of weight in Japan because, on the one hand, many of us, at least we look at Japan from a Western perspective and we see tea ceremony and kaiseki cooking and all kinds of beautiful woodblock prints. We see the aesthetics. But what we don't often see is that most Japanese don't live an aesthetic life. They live a bureaucratized life. They have
Mhm.
mastered Max Weber's functional organizational bureaucracy more than any society I think I know. And so for these Japanese people who are living rigorously controlled bureaucratic lives, she offers them the aesthetics of hope. Wouldn't you like to have more in your life than this? Do you really
Mhm.
think that managing your life so that you eat well and you make a lot of money and you live a long life, is that enough? This guy threw all that away, and aren't you moved by him? So it's a very powerful way of using literature to get right at people's hearts. And I think she understood that that is the power of Maximilian Kolbe's story in Auschwitz. It really haunts people. Why would you give up your life in Auschwitz, of all places where everybody's trying to stay alive? What would lead someone to do that? And of course, I think the question she's asking her
Yeah.
readers, as you put so well, is, would you do it? Or were you willing to do that?
There is this really profoundly shocking, for the protagonist and for the reader also, moment um midway through the book where she finds out that the man who Father Kolbe died to
Yes.
save, who had a family and children, and that's why he chose to die in his place, uh, that he came back home to find that both of his sons had died.
Yeah. No
And
family.
it's, yeah,
Yeah.
and so it's just him and his wife,
Right.
and it's profoundly shocking, and it makes her ask, it really demoralizes her, and it makes her ask, well, what was the point of that? And it causes you the same question, not like, was it, that it wasn't a beautiful act, but like, why would God arrange things such, was really more my
That's right.
question.
That's right.
um and so she doesn't really attempt to answer that question, but she does attempt to answer the question of, what meaning did his act then have? And it has to do with this kind of idea of like an aesthetics of that this is who he is. And she
Hmm.
says that he gave his life for life, that he didn't give his life, in a sense, he didn't give his life for this family. He gave his life because this is what he has to do. This is what a priest has to do. This is the mission that he was given by God. It's for him to pour out his life in this way, and he saw his opportunity and he took it.
Right.
Um, so no doubt it is a self-giving act, and was for that man and for his family. But also, I'm sure that Saint Maximilian knew that this was his golden opportunity, personally. Um, so that's kind of the conclusion she comes to, is that this is just the meaning of his life, was to do this act, and that this was how he could have life more abundantly. That's not how she puts it, but that kind of idea. So
Yeah.
it's a fascinating section, but yeah, that revelation has like a big impact. It kind of,
It's devastating. It's almost as
yeah,
devastating as the Auschwitz scene, because she even builds up to it, looking for the
right,
grandkids' shoes and not finding them. But the thing I would emphasize is that what she does as a writer, and this is probably based on a true story, that she did go there and meet the Gajonichek family, Francis and his wife. If you remember that scene, well, she says, "Okay, so where are your kids?" And they get real nervous, and the wife finally just gets up and walks away. And she realizes, and she follows her into the next room, and she sees the wife sitting there just crying with her back to her. And Sono's alter ego goes up and just hugs her. And I think
yeah,
that's what she's trying to say. I think what she's trying to say is that Maximilian Kolbe's gesture was to teach us to love one another. It wasn't all about saving this guy's kids. It was
hmm,
about teaching us to love. And so
right,
she puts herself into that scene and incorporates kind of the legacy of Maximilian Kolbe, and also tells her readers, who are deeply moved by that scene, this is the aesthetics she was talking about. It's an aesthetics of love. That's the
mm,
lesson of Maximilian Kolbe. He learned to love. Very interesting point I just discovered recently, because a Franciscan who was part of the Franciscan conventionals that Maximilian Kolbe founded in Nagasaki, a man named Friar Ozaki, wrote a book on Maximilian Kolbe in Nagasaki. It's just come out in English from Immaculata Academy Publishers. And on the back, Friar Ozaki quotes a Polish priest who knew Kolbe when he left Poland and when he came back from Japan. By the way, he's in Japan 6 years. Oftentimes people overlook that. They think it was a short interlude. He was there for 6 years. This Polish priest said, when Father Maximilian left, he left as a priest. When he came back from Japan, he came back as a saint. This is before Auschwitz. And I think that's one of the reasons that looking at the Japan connection is so important to understanding Maximilian Kolbe, because what he did there for 6 years was amazing, deep aesthetic, not aesthetic and beauty, but ascetical, as in self-denial life.
hmm,
He lived an enormously ascetical life of self-denial, and put all of the money towards publishing this book, this pamphlet, The Knights of the Immaculata. And he had learned to discipline himself so much towards the one goal, serving Our Lady and through her Christ, that when he got to Auschwitz, he was prepared for it. He knew that his whole existence was to be orchestrated around that one telos, this one goal, which he had practiced for 6 years in Japan. So I think if people really want to understand Maximilian Kolbe's spirituality, they do have to look at the time he spent in Japan and what we can learn from his Japan nexus.
Hmm.
Certainly, I was impressed by that.